See no evil. The solid universe is pervious to love. With bandaged eyes he never errs, around, below, above. His blinding light he flingeth white on God's and Satan's brood, and reconciles, by mystic wiles, the evil and the good. Emerson. If thou thinkest evil, be thou sure, thine acts will bear the shadow of the stain, and if they thought be perfect, then thy deed will be as of the perfect, true and pure. Confucius. After much practice in forgiveness, and having cultivated the spirit of forgiveness up to a certain point, knowledge of the actual nature of good and evil dawns upon the mind, and a man begins to understand how thoughts and motives are formed in the human heart, how they develop, and how take birth in the form of actions. This marks the opening of a new vision in the mind, the commencement of a nobler, higher, diviner life. For the man now begins to perceive that there is no necessity to resist or resent the actions of others towards him, whatever those actions may be, and that all along his resentment has been caused by his own ignorance, and that his own bitterness of spirit is wrong. Having arrived thus far, he will take himself with some such questionings as these. Why this continual retaliation and forgiveness? Why this tormenting anger against another, and then this repentance and forgiveness? Is not forgiveness the taking back of one's anger, the giving up of one's resentment? And if anger and resentment are good and necessary, why repent of them and give them up? If it is so beautiful, so sweet, so peaceful to get rid of all feelings of bitterness and to utterly and wholly forgive, would it not be still more beautiful and sweet and peaceful never to grow bitter at all, never to know anger, never to resent as evil the action of another, but always to live in the experience of that pure, calm, blissful love which is known when an act of forgiveness is done, and all unruly passion towards another is put away? If another has done me wrong, is not my hatred towards him wrong, and can one wrong right another? Moreover, has he by his wrong really injured me, or has he injured himself? Am I not injured by my own wrong rather than by his? Why then do I grow angry? Why do I resent, retaliate, and engage in bitter thoughts? Is it not because my pride is piqued, or my vanity wounded, or my selfishness thwarted? Is not because my blind animal passions are aroused and allowed to subdue my better nature? Seeing that I am hurt by another person's attitude towards me because of my own pride or vanity or ungoverned and unpurified passions, would it not be better to look to the wrong in myself rather than the wrong in another, to get rid of pride and vanity and passion, and so avoid being hurt at all? By such self-questionings and their elucidation in the light of mild thoughts and dispassionate conduct, a man gradually overcoming passion and rising out of the ignorance which gave rise to passion, will at last reach that blessed state in which he will cease to see evil in others, and will dwell in universal goodwill and love and peace. Not that he will cease to see ignorance and folly, not that he will cease to see suffering and sorrow and misery, not that he will cease to distinguish between acts that are pure and impure, right and wrong, for having put away passion and prejudice, he will see these things in the full, clear light of knowledge, and exactly as they are. But he will cease to see anything, any evil power, in another which can do him injury, which he must violently oppose and strive to crush, and against which he must guard himself. Having arrived at right understanding of evil, by purging it away from his own heart, he sees that it is a thing that does not call for hatred and fear and resentment, but for consideration, compassion, and love. Shakespeare, through one of his characters, says, "There is no darkness but ignorance. All evil is ignorance, is dense darkness of mind, and the removal of sin from one's mind is a coming out of darkness into spiritual light. Evil is the negation of good, just as darkness is the negation or absence of light. And what is there in a negation to arouse anger or resentment? When night settles down upon the world, who is so foolish as to rail at the darkness? The enlightened man, likewise, does not accuse or condemn the spiritual darkness in men's hearts which is manifested in the form of sin, though by gentle reproof he may sometimes point out where the light lies. Now the ignorance to which I refer as evil, or as the source of evil, is twofold. There is wrongdoing which is committed without any knowledge of good and evil, and where there is no choice, this is unconscious wrongdoing. Then there is wrongdoing which is done in the knowledge that it ought not to be done. This is conscious wrongdoing. But both unconscious and conscious wrongdoing arise in ignorance, that is, ignorance of the real nature and painful consequences of the wrongdoing. Why does a man continue to do certain things which he feels he ought not to do? If he knows that what he is doing is wrong, where lies the ignorance? He continues to do those things because his knowledge of them is incomplete. He only knows he ought not to do them by certain precepts without and qualms of conscience within, but he does not fully and completely understand what he is doing. He knows that certain acts bring him immediate pleasure, and so, in spite of the troubled conscience which follows that pleasure, he continues to commit them. He is convinced that the pleasure is good and desirable, and therefore to be enjoyed. He does not know that pleasure and pain are one, but thinks he can have the one without the other. He has no knowledge of the law which governs human actions, and never thinks of associating his sufferings with his own wrongdoing, but believes that they are caused by the wrongdoing of others, or are the mysterious dispensations of providence, and therefore not to be inquired into or understood. He is seeking happiness, and does those things which he believes will bring him most enjoyment, but he acts in entire ignorance of the hidden and inevitable consequences which attach to his actions. Said a man to me once who was the victim of a bad habit, "I know the habit is a bad one and that it does me more harm than good." I said, "If you know that what you are doing is bad and harmful, why do you continue to do it?" And he replied, "Because it is pleasant and I like it." This man, of course, did not really know that his habit was bad. He had been told that it was, and he thought he knew or believed it was, but in reality he thought it was good, that it was conducive to his happiness and well-being, and therefore he continued to practice it. When a man knows by experience that a thing is bad, and that every time he does it, he injures body or mind, or both, when his knowledge of that thing is so complete that he is acquainted with its whole train of baneful effects, then he cannot only not do it any longer, he cannot even desire to do it, and even the pleasure that was formerly in that thing becomes painful. No man would put a venomous snake in his pocket because it is prettily colored. He knows that a deadly sting lurks in those beautiful markings, nor when a man knows the unavoidable pain and hurt which lie hidden in wrong thoughts and acts does he continue to think and commit them. Even the immediate pleasure which formerly he greedily sought is gone from them. Their surface attractiveness has vanished. He is no longer ignorant concerning their true nature. He sees them as they are. I knew a young man who was in business, and although a member of a church and occupying the position of voluntary religious instructor, he told me that it was absolutely necessary to practice lying and deception in business, otherwise sure and certain ruin would follow. He said he knew lying was wrong, but while he remained in business, he must continue to do it. Upon questioning him, I found, of course, that he had never tried truth and honesty in his business, had not even thought of trying the better way. So firmly convinced was he that it was not possible for him to know whether or not it would be productive or ruin. Now, did this young man know that lying was wrong? There was a perceptual sense only in which he knew, but there was a deeper and more real sense in which he did not know. He had been taught to regard lying as wrong, and his conscience bore out that teaching, but he believed that it brought to him profit, prosperity, and happiness, and that honesty would bring him loss, poverty, and misery. In a word, he regarded lying deep in his heart as the right thing to do, and honesty as the wrong practice. He had no knowledge whatever of the real nature of the act of lying, how it is on the instant of its committal, loss of character, loss of self-respect, loss of power, usefulness, and influence, and loss of blessedness, and how it unerringly leads to loss of reputation, and loss of material profit and prosperity. Only when such a man begins to consider happiness of others, prefers to embrace the loss which he fears, rather than clutch at the gain which he desires, will he obtain that real knowledge which lofty moral conduct alone can reveal, and then, experiencing the greater blessedness, he will see how all along he has been deceiving and defrauding himself rather than others, has been living in darkest ignorance and self-delusion. These two common instances of wrongdoing will serve to illustrate and make plainer to those of my readers who, while searching for truth, are as yet doubtful, uncertain and confused, the deep truth that all sin or evil is a condition of ignorance, and therefore to be dealt with in a loving and not a hateful spirit. And as with bad habits and lying, so with all sin, with lust, hatred, malice, envy, pride, vanity, self-indulgence, and selfishness in all its forms, it is a state of spiritual darkness, the absence of the light of truth in the heart, the negation of knowledge. Thus, when, by overcoming the wrong condition in one's own heart, the nature of evil is fully realized and mere belief gives place to living knowledge, evil can no longer be hatefully condemned and violently resisted, and the wrongdoer is thought of with tender compassion. And this brings us to another aspect of evil, namely that of individual freedom, the right of every person to choose his own actions. Along with the seeing of evil in others is the desire to convert or coerce others into one's own ways of thinking and acting. Probably the commonest delusion in which men are involved is that of thinking that what they themselves believe and think and do is good, and all that is otherwise is evil, and therefore to be powerfully condemned and resisted. It is out of this delusion that all persecution springs. There are Christians who regard all atheists as men wholly evil, as given up to the service of an evil power, and there are atheists who firmly believe that all Christians are doing the greatest harm to the whole human race by their superstitious and false doctrines. The truth is that neither the Christian nor the atheist is evil, nor in the service of evil, but each is choosing his own way, and is pursuing that course which he is convinced is right. Let a man quietly contemplate the fact that numbers of followers of various religions the world over are, as they ever were, engaged in condemning each other as evil and wrong, and regarding themselves as good and right, and it will help him to realize how all evil is merely ignorant spiritual darkness. And earnest meditation on that fact will be found to be one of the greatest aids in developing greater kindness, charity, insight, and breadth of mind. The truly wise and good man sees good in all, evil in none. He has abandoned the folly of wanting others to think and act as he thinks and acts, for he sees men are variously constituted, are at different points in their spiritual evolution, and must of necessity think and act differently. Having put away hatred, condemnation, egotism, and prejudice, he has become enlightened and sees that purity, love, compassion, gentleness, patience, humility, and unselfishness are manifestations of light and knowledge, while impurity, hatred, cruelty, passion, darkness, and ignorance, and that whether men are living in light or darkness, they are one and all doing that which they think is necessary, are acting in accordance with their own measure of light or darkness. The wise man understands, and understanding, he ceases from all bitterness and accusation. Every man acts in accordance with his nature, with his own sense of right and wrong, and is surely gathering in the results of his own experience. There is one supreme right which every being possesses, to think and act as he chooses. If he chooses to think and act selfishly, thinking of his own immediate happiness only and not of that of others, then he will rapidly bring upon himself, by the action of the moral law of cause and effect, such afflictions as will cause him to pause and consider, and so find a better way. There is no teacher to compare with experience, no chastisement so corrective and purifying as that which men ignorantly inflict upon themselves. The selfish man is the ignorant man. He chooses his own way, but it is a way which leads to suffering, and through suffering to knowledge and bliss. The good man is the wise man. He likewise chooses his own way, but he chooses it in the full light of knowledge, having passed through the stages of ignorance and suffering, and arrived at knowledge and bliss. A man begins to understand what seeing no evil is when, putting away all personal desires in his judgments of others, he considers them from their own standpoint and judges their actions not from his own standard, but from theirs. It is because men set up arbitrary standards of right and wrong and are anxious that all should conform to their particular standard that they see evil in each other. A man is only rightly judged when he is judged not from my standard or yours, but from his own, and to deal with him thus is not judgment, it is love. It is only when we look through the eyes of impersonal love that we become enlightened and see others as they really are. And a man is approaching that love when he can say in his heart, "Who am I that I should judge another? Am I so pure and sinless that I arraign men and pass the judgment of evil upon them? Rather let me humble myself and correct mine own errors before assuming the position of supreme judge of those of other men." It was said by one of old to those who were about to stone as evil a woman taken in the act of committing one of the darkest sins, "He that is without sin, let him cast the first stone." And though he who said it was without sin, yet he took up no stone, nor passed any bitter judgment, but said with infinite gentleness and compassion, "Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more." In the pure heart there is no room left where personal judgments and hatreds can find lodgment, for it is filled to overflowing with tenderness and love. It sees no evil, and only as men succeed in seeing no evil in others will they become free from sin and sorrow and suffering. No man sees evil in himself or his own acts except the man who is becoming enlightened, and then he abandons those acts which he has come to see are wrong. Every man justifies himself in what he does, and, however evil others may regard his conduct, he himself thinks it to be good and necessary. If he did not, he would not, could not do it. The angry man always justifies his anger, the covetous man his greed, the impure man his unchastity. The liar considers that his lying is altogether necessary. The slanderer believes that, in vilifying the characters of those whom he dislikes and warning other people against their evil natures, he is doing well. The thief is convinced that stealing is the shortest and best way to plenty, prosperity, and happiness, and even the murderer thinks that there is a ground of justification for his deed. Every man's deeds are in accordance with the measure of his own light or darkness, and no man can live higher than he is or act beyond the limits of his knowledge. Nevertheless, he can improve himself, and thereby gradually increase his light and extend the range of his knowledge. The angry man indulges in raillery and abuse because his knowledge does not extend to forbearance and patience. Not having practiced gentleness, he does not understand it and cannot choose it, nor can he know by its comparison with the light of gentleness the darkness of anger. It is the same with the liar, the slanderer, and the thief. He lives in this dark condition of mind and action because he is limited to it by his immature knowledge and experience, because never having lived in the higher conditions, he has no knowledge of them, and it is to him as if they were non-existent. The light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. Nor can he understand even the conditions in which he is living, because being dark, they are necessarily devoid of all knowledge. When a man driven by repeated sufferings to at last reflect upon his conduct, comes to see that his anger or lying, or whatever ignorant condition he may have been living in, is productive only of trouble and sorrow, then he abandons it and commences to search for and practice the opposite and enlightened condition. And when he is firmly established in the better way, so that his knowledge of both conditions is complete, then he realizes in what great darkness he had formerly lived. This knowledge of good and evil by experience constitutes enlightenment. When a man begins to look, as it were, through the eyes of others, and to measure them by their own standard and not by his, then he ceases from seeing of evil in others, for he knows that every man's perception and standard of good and evil is different, that there is no vice so low, but some men regard it as good, no virtue so high, but some men regard it as evil. And what a man regards as good, that to him is good, what he regards as evil, that to him is evil. Nor will the purified man, who has ceased to see evil in others, have any desire to win men to his own ways or opinions, but will rather help them in their own particular groove, knowing that an enlarged experience only, and not merely change of opinion, can lead to higher knowledge and greater blessedness. It will be found that men see evil in those who differ from them, good in those who agree with them. The man who greatly loves himself and is enamoured of his opinions will love all those who agree with him, and will dislike all those who disagree with him. If ye love them that love ye, what reward have ye? Love your enemies, do good to them that hate you. Egotism and vanity make men blind. Men of opposing religious views hate and persecute each other. Men of opposing political views fight and condemn each other. The partisan measures all men by his own standard, and sets up his judgments accordingly. So convinced is he that he is right and others wrong, that he at last persuades himself that to inflict cruelty on others is both good and necessary, in order to coerce them into his way of thinking and acting, and so bring them to the right, his right, against their own reason and will. Men hate, condemn, resist, and inflict suffering upon each other, not because they are intrinsically evil, not because they are deliberately wicked and are doing in the full light of truth what they know to be wrong, but because they regard such conduct as necessary and right. All men are intrinsically good, but some are wiser than others, are older in experience than others. I recently heard, in substance, the following conversation between two men whom I will call D and E. The third person, referred to as X, is a prominent politician. A great teacher was once asked by one of his disciples to explain the distinction between good and evil, and holding his hand with the fingers pointing downward, he said, "Where is my hand pointing?" And the disciple replied, "It is pointing downward." Then, turning his hand upward, the teacher asked, "Where now is my hand pointing?" And the disciple answered, "It is pointing upward." "That," said the teacher, "is the distinction between evil and good." By this simple illustration, he indicated that evil is merely wrongly directed energy, and good rightly directed energy, and that the so-called evil man becomes good by reversing his conduct. To understand the true nature of evil by living in the good is to cease to see other men as evil. Blessed is he who, turning from the evil in others, exerts himself in the purification of his own heart. He shall one day become of too pure eyes to behold evil. Knowing the nature of evil, what does it behove a man to do? It behooves him to live only in that which is good. Therefore, if a man condemn me, I will not condemn him in return. If he revile me, I will give him kindness. If he slander me, I will speak of his good qualities. If he hate me, then he greatly needs and shall receive my love. With the impatient I will be patient. With the greedy I will be generous. And with the violent and quarrelsome I will be mild and peaceable. Seeing no evil, whom should I hate, or who regard as mine enemy? Were mankind murderous or jealous upon you, my brother, my sister? I'm so sorry for you. They are not murderous or jealous upon me. All has been gentle with me. I keep no account with lamentation. What have I to do with lamentation? He who sees men as evil imagines that behind those acts which are called wicked, there is a corporate and substantial evil prompting those particular sins, but he of stainless vision sees the deeds themselves as the evil, and knows that there is no evil power, no evil soul or man behind those deeds. The substance of the universe is good. There is no substance of evil. Good alone is permanent. There is no fixed or permanent evil. As brothers and sisters, born of the same parents and being of one household, love each other through all vicissitudes, see no evil in each other, but overlook all errors and cling together in the strong bonds of affection. Even so, the good man sees humanity as one spiritual family, born of the same father-mother, being of the same essence and making for the same goal. And he regards all men and women as his brothers and sisters, makes no divisions and distinctions, sees none as evil, but is at peace with all. Happy is he who attains to this blessed state. Abiding joy, who carry music in their heart, through dusky lane and wrangling mart, plying their daily toil with busier feet, because their secret souls a holier repeat. Serene will be our days and bright, and happy will our nature be, when love is an unerring light, and joy its own security. Wordsworth. Abiding joy. Is there such a thing? Where is it? Who possesses it? Yea, there is such a thing. It is where there is no sin. It is possessed by the pure-hearted. As darkness is a passing shadow, and light is substance that remains, so sorrow is fleeting, but joy abides forever. No true thing can pass away and become lost. No false thing can remain and be preserved. Sorrow is false, and it cannot live. Joy is true, and it cannot die. Joy may become hidden for a time, but it can always be recovered. Sorrow may remain for a period, but it can be transcended and dispersed. Do not think your sorrow will remain. It will pass away like a cloud. Do not believe that the torments of sin are ever your portion. They will vanish like a hideous nightmare. Awake, arise, be holy and joyful. You are the creator of your own shadows. You desire and then you grieve. Renounce and then you all rejoice. You are not the impotent slave of sorrow. The never-ending gladness awaits your homecoming. You are not the helpless prisoner of the darkness and dreams of sin. Even now the beautiful light of holiness shines upon your sleeping lids, ready to greet your awakening vision. In the heavy, troubled sleep of sin and self, the abiding joy is lost and forgotten. Its undying music is no more heard, and the fragrance of its fadeless flowers no longer cheers the heart of the wayfarer. But when sin and self are abandoned, when the clinging to things for personal pleasure is put away, then the shadows of grief disappear, and the heart is restored to its imperishable joy. Joy comes and fills the self-emptied heart. It abides with the peaceful. Its reign is with the pure. Joy flees from the selfish. It deserts the quarrelsome. It is hidden from the impure. Joy is as an angel so beautiful and delicate and chaste that she can only dwell with holiness. She cannot remain with selfishness. She is wedded to love. Every man is truly happy in so far as he is unselfish. He is miserable in so far as he is selfish. All truly good men, and by good men I mean those who have fought victoriously the battle against self, are men of joy. How great is the jubilation of the saint! No true teacher promises sorrow as the ultimate of life. He promises joy. He points to sorrow, but only as a process which sin has rendered necessary. Where self ends, grief passes away. Joy is the companion of righteousness. In the divine life, tender compassion fills the place where weeping sorrow sat. During the process of becoming unselfish, there are periods of deep sorrow. Purification is necessarily severe. All becoming is painful. Abiding joy is its completion is realized only in the perfection of being, and this is a state where all is loveliness and power and love, with all sublimest qualities of mind, where all enjoy entire dominion o'er themselves, acts, feelings, thoughts, conditions, qualities. Consider how a flower evolves and becomes. At first there is a little germ groping its way in the dark soil towards the upper light. Then the plant appears, and leaf is added unto leaf, and finally the perfected flower appears, in the sweet perfume and chaste beauty of which all effort ceases. The good, the pure, are the superlatively happy. However men may argumentatively deny or qualify this, humanity instinctively knows it to be true. Do not men everywhere picture their angels as the most joyful of beings? There are joyful angels in bodies of flesh. We meet them and pass on, and how many of those who come in contact with them are sufficiently pure to see vision within the form, to see the incorruptible angel in its common instrument of clay? They needs must grope who cannot see, and the blade before the ear must be. The outward symbols disappear from him whose inward sight is clear. Yes, the pure are the joyful. We look almost in vain for any expressions of sorrow in the words of Jesus. The man of sorrows is only completed in the man of joy. I, Buddha, who wept with all my brother's tears, whose heart was broken by a whole world's woe, laugh and am glad, for there is liberty. In sin and in the struggle against sin there is unrest and affliction, but in the perfection of truth, in the path of righteousness, there is abiding joy. Enter the path, there spring the healing streams, quenching all thirst. There bloom the immortal flowers, carpeting all the way with joy, their throng, swiftest and sweetest hours. Tribulation lasts only so long as there remains some chaff of self which needs to be removed. The tribulum, or threshing machine, ceases to work when all the grain is separated from chaff, and when the last impurities are blown away from the soul, tribulation has completed its work, and there is no more need for it. Then abiding joy is realized. All the saints and prophets and saviors of the race have proclaimed with rejoicing the gospel, or the good news. All men know what good news is: an impending calamity avoided, a disease cured, friends arrived or returned in safety, difficulties overcome, success in some enterprise assured. But what is the good news of the saintly ones? This, that there is peace for the troubled, healing for the afflicted, gladness for the grief-stricken, victory for the sinful, a homecoming for the wanderer, and joy for the sorrowing and broken-hearted. Not that these beautiful realities shall be in some future world, but they are here and now, that they are known and realized and enjoyed, and are therefore proclaimed, that all may accept them, who will break the galling bonds of self and rise into the glorious liberty of unselfish love. Seek the highest good, and as you find it, as you practice it and realize it, you will taste the deepest, sweetest joy. As you succeed in forgetting your own selfish desires, in your thoughtfulness for others, in your care for others, in your service for others, just so far and no further will you find and realize the abiding joy in life. Inside the gateway of unselfishness lies the Elysium of abiding joy, and whosoever will may enter in, whosoever doubts let him come and see. And knowing this, that selfishness leads to misery, unselfishness to joy, not merely for oneself alone, for if this were all, how unworthy could be our endeavors, but for the whole world, and because all with whom we live and come in contact will be the happier and truer for our unselfishness, because humanity is one, and the joy of one is the joy of all. Knowing this, let us scatter flowers and not thorns in the common ways of life. Yea, even in the highway of our enemies let us scatter the blossoms of unselfish love. So shall the pressure in their footprints fill the air with the perfume of holiness, and gladden the world with the aroma of joy. Silentness. Be still, my soul. Rest a while from the feverish activities in which you lose yourself. Be not afraid to be left alone with yourself for 1 short hour. Ernest Crosley. Be still, the crown of life is silentness. Give thou a quiet hour to each long day. Too much of time we spend in profitless and foolish talk, too little do we say. If thou wouldst gather words that shall avail, learning a wisdom worthy to express, leave for a while thy chat and empty tale. Study the golden speech of silentness. L. Salmon. In the words of a wise man there is great power, but his silence is more powerful still. The greatest men teach us most effectively when they are purposely silent. The silent attitude of the great man, noted perhaps by one or two of his disciples only, is recorded and preserved through the ages, while the obtrusive words of the merely clever talker, heard perhaps by thousands and at once popularized, are neglected and forgotten in, at most, a few generations. The silence of Jesus when asked by Pilate what is truth is the impressive, the awful silence of profound wisdom. It is pregnant with humility and reproof, and perpetually rebukes that shallowness, that illustrating the truth that fools step in where angels fear to tread, would in terms of triteness parcel out the universe, or think to utter the be-all and the end-all of the mystery of things in some textual formula or theological platitude. When, plied with questions about Brahma, God, by the argumentative Brahmans, Buddha remained silent. He taught them better than they knew, and if by his silence he failed to satisfy the foolish, he thereby profoundly instructed the wise. Why all this ceaseless talk about God, with its accompaniment of intolerance? Let men practice some measure of kindliness and goodwill, and thereby acquaint themselves with the simple rudiments of wisdom. Why all these speculative arguments about the nature of God? Let us first understand somewhat of ourselves. There are no greater marks of folly and moral immaturity than irreverence and presumption, no greater manifestations of wisdom and moral maturity than reverence and humility. Lao Tzu, in his own life, exemplified his teaching that the wise man teaches without words. Disciples were attracted to him by the power which ever accompanies a wise reserve. Living in comparative obscurity and silence, not courting the ear of men, and never going out to teach, men sought him out and learned of him wisdom. The silent acts of the great ones are beacons to the wise, illuminating their pathway with no uncertain radiance. For he would attain to virtue and wisdom must learn, not only when to speak and what to say, but also when to remain silent and what not to say. The right control of the tongue is the beginning of wisdom. The right control of the mind is the consummation of wisdom. By curbing his tongue, a man gains possession of his mind, and to have complete possession of one's mind is to be a master of silence. The fool babbles, gossips, argues, and bandies words. He glories in the fact that he has had the last word and has silenced his opponent. He exults in his own folly, is ever on the defensive, and wastes his energies in unprofitable channels. He is like a gardener who continues to dig and plant in unproductive soil. The wise man avoids idle words, gossip, vain argument, and self-defense. He's content to appear defeated, rejoices when he is defeated, knowing that, having found and removed another error in himself, he has thereby become wiser. Blessed is he who does not strive for the last word. Backward I see in my own days where I sweated through, fog with linguists and contenders. I have no mockings or arguments, I witness and wait. Silence under provocation is the mark of a cultured and sympathetic soul. The thoughtless and unkind are stirred by every slight provocation and will lose their mental balance by even the appearance of a personal encroachment. The self-possession of Jesus is not a miracle, it is the flower of culture, the diadem of wisdom. When we read of Jesus that he answered never a word, and of Buddha that he remained silent, we get a glimpse of the vast power of silence, of the silent majesty of true greatness. The silent man is the powerful man. The victim of garrulity is devoid of influence. His spiritual energies are dissipated. Every mechanic knows that before a force can be utilized and definitely directed, it must be conserved and stored, and the wise man is a spiritual mechanic who conserves the energies of his mind, holds them in masterful abeyance, ready at any moment to direct them with effective purpose to the accomplishment of some necessary work. The true strength is in silentness. It is well said that the dog that barks does not bite. The grim and rarely broken silence of the bulldog is the necessary adjunct to that powerfully concentrated and effectual action for which the animal is known and feared. This, of course, is a lower form of silentness, but the principle is the same. The boaster fails, his mind is diverted from the main purpose, and his energies are frittered away upon self-glorification. His forces are divided between his task and the reward to himself, the greater portion going to feed the lust of reward. He is like an unskillful general who loses the battle through dividing his forces instead of concentrating them upon a point. Or he is like a careless engineer who leaves open the waste valve of his engine and allows the steam to run down. The modest, silent, earnest man succeeds, freed from vanity, and avoiding the dissipation of self-glorification. All his powers are concentrated upon the successful performance of his task. Even while the other man is talking about his powers, he is already about his work, and is so much nearer than the other to its completion. It is a law everywhere and always that energy distributed is subject unto energy conserved. The noisy and boasting Charles will ever be thrown by the quiet and modest Orlando. It is a law universally applicable that quietness is strength. The businessman who succeeds never talks about his plans, methods, and affairs, and should he, turned giddy by success, begin to do this, he will then commence to fail. The man of great moral influence never talks about himself and his spiritual victories, for should he do so, in that moment his moral power and influence would be gone, and like Samson, he would be shorn of his strength. Success, worldly or spiritual, is the willing servant of strong, steady, silent, unflinching purpose. The most powerful disintegrating forces make no noise. The greatly overcoming mind works silently. If you would be strong, useful, and self-reliant, learn the value and power of silentness. Do not talk about yourself. The world instinctively knows that the vain talker is weak and empty, and so it leaves him to his own vanity. Do not talk about what you are going to do, but do it, and let your finished work speak for itself. Do not waste your forces in criticizing and disparaging the work of others, but set about to do your own work thoroughly and well. The worst work with earnestness and sweetness behind it is altogether better than barking at others. While you are disparaging the work of others, you are neglecting your own. If others are doing badly, help and instruct them by doing better yourself. Neither abuse others nor account their abuse of any weight. When attacked, remain silent. In this way, you will conquer yourself and will, without the use of words, teach others. But the true silence is not merely a silent tongue. It is a silent mind. To merely hold one's tongue and yet to carry about a disturbed and rankling mind is no remedy for weakness and no source of power. Silentness, to be powerful, must envelop the whole mind, must permeate every chamber of the heart. It must be the silence of peace. To this broad, deep, abiding silentness a man attains only in the measure that he conquers himself. While passions, temptations, and sorrows disturb, the holier, profounder depths of silence are yet to be sounded. To smart under the words and actions of others means that you are yet weak, uncontrolled, unpurified. So rid your heart of the disturbing influences of vanity and pride and selfishness that no petty spite can reach you, no slander or abuse disturb your serene repose. As the storm rages ineffectually against a well-built house, while its occupant sits composed and happy by his fireside within, so no evil without can disturb or harm him who is well fortified with wisdom. Self-governed and silent, he remains at peace within. To this great silence the self-conquered man attains. Envy and calumny and hate and pain and that unrest which men miscall delight can touch him not, nor torture him again. There is no commoner error amongst men than that of supposing that nothing can be accomplished without much talking and much noise. The busy, shallow talker regards the quiet thinker or silent doer as a man wasted. He thinks silentness means doing nothing, and that hurrying, bustling, and ceaseless talking means doing much. He also confounds popularity with power, but the thinker and doer is the real and effectual worker. His work is at the root and core and substance of things, and as nature silently, yet with hidden and wondrous alchemy, transmutes the rude elements of earth and air into tender leaves, beautiful flowers, delectable fruits, yea, into a myriad forms of beauty, even so does the silent, purposeful worker transform the ways of men and the face of the world by the might and magic of his silently directed energy. He wastes no time and force in tinkering with the ever-changing and artificial surface of things, but goes to the living vital centre, and works therefrom and thereon, and in due season perhaps, when his perishable form is withdrawn from the world, the fruits of his obscure but imperishable labours come forth to gladden the world. But the words of the talker perish. The world reaps no harvest from the sowing of sound. He who conserves his mental forces also conserves his physical forces. The strongly quiet, calm man lives to a greater age, and in the possession of better health than the hurrying, noisy man. Quiet, subdued mental harmony is conducive to physical harmony, health. The followers of George Fox are today the healthiest, longest-lived and most successful portion of the British community, and they live quiet, unostentatious, purposeful lives, avoiding all worldly excitements and unnecessary words. They are a silent people, all their meetings being conducted on the principle that silence is power. Silentness is powerful because it is the outcome of self-conquest. And the more successfully a man governs himself, the more silent he becomes. As he succeeds in living to a purpose and not to the pleasures of self, he withdraws himself from the outer discords of the world and reaches to the inward music of peace. Then, when he speaks, there is purpose and power behind his words, and when he maintains silence, there is equal or even greater power therein. He does not utter that which is followed by pain and tears, does not do that which is productive of sorrow and remorse, but saying and doing those things only which are ripe with thoughtfulness, his conscience is quiet, and all his days are blessed. Solitude. In the still hour when passion is at rest, gather up stores of wisdom in thy breast. Wordsworth. Why idly seek from outward things the answer inward silence brings? Why climb the far-off hills with pain, a nearer view of heaven to gain? In lowliest depths of bosky dells, the hermit contemplation dwells, whence, piercing heaven with screened sight, he sees at noon the stars, whose light shall glorify the coming night. Whittier. Man's essential being is inward, invisible or spiritual, and as such it derives its life, strength, from within, not from without. Outward things are channels through which its energies are expended, but for renewal it must fall back on the inward silence. In so far as man strives to drown this silence in the noisy pleasures of the senses and endeavours to live in the conflicts of outward things, just so much does he reap the experiences of pain and sorrow, which, becoming at last intolerable, drive him back to the feet of inward comforter, to the shrine of the peaceful solitude within. As the body cannot thrive on empty husks, neither can the spirit be sustained on empty pleasures. If not regularly fed, the body loses its vitality and, pained with hunger and thirst, cries out for food and drink. It is the same with the spirit. It must be regularly nourished in solitude on pure and holy thoughts, or it will lose its freshness and strength, and will at last cry out in its painful and utter starvation. The yearning of an anguish-stricken soul for light and consolation is the cry of a spirit that is perishing of hunger and thirst. All pain and sorrow is spiritual starvation, and aspiration is the cry for food. It is the prodigal son who, perishing of hunger, turns his face longingly towards his father's home. The pure life of the spirit cannot be found, but is lost in the life of the senses. The lower desires are ever clamorous for more, and they afford no rest. The outward world of pleasure, personal contact, and noisy activities is a sphere of wear and tear, which necessitates the counterbalancing effect of solitude. Just as the body requires rest for the recuperation of its forces, so the spirit requires solitude for the renewal of its energies. Solitude is as indispensable to man's spiritual welfare as sleep is to his bodily well-being, and pure thought or meditation, which is evoked in solitude, is to the spirit what activity is to the body. As the body breaks down when deprived of the needful rest and sleep, so do the spirits of men break down, being deprived of the necessary silence and solitude. Man, as a spiritual being, cannot be maintained in strength, uprightness, and peace, except he periodically withdraw himself from the outer world of perishable things and reach inwardly towards the abiding and imperishable realities. The consolations of the creeds are derived from the solitude which those creeds enforce. The regular observance of the ceremonies of formal religion, attended as they are with concentrated silence and freedom from worldly distractions, compels men to do unconsciously that which they have not yet learned to do consciously, namely to concentrate the mind periodically on the inward silence and meditate, though very briefly, on high and holy things. In solitude, a man gathers strength to meet the difficulties and temptations of life, knowledge to understand and conquer them, and wisdom to transcend them. As a building is preserved and sustained by virtue of the foundation which is hidden and unobserved, so a man is maintained perpetually in strength and peace by virtue of his lonely hour of intense thought, which no eye beholds. It is in solitude only that a man can be truly revealed to himself, that he can come to understand his real nature, with all its powers and possibilities. The voice of the Spirit is not heard in the hubbub of the world and amid the clamours of conflicting desires. There can be no spiritual growth without solitude. There are those who shrink from too close a scrutiny of themselves, who dread too complete a self-revelation, and who fear that solitude which would leave them alone with their own thoughts and call up before their mental vision the wraith of their desires. And so they go where the din of pleasure is loudest, and where the reproving voice of truth is drowned. But he who loves truth, who desires and seeks wisdom, will be much alone. He will seek the fullest, clearest revelation of himself, will avoid the haunts of frivolity and noise, and will go where the sweet, tender voice of the Spirit of truth can speak within him and be heard. Men go after much company and seek out new excitements, but they are not acquainted with peace. In diverse paths of pleasure they search for happiness, but they do not come to rest. Through diverse ways of laughter and feverish delirium they wander after gladness and life, but their tears are many and grievous, and they do not escape death. Drifting upon the ocean of life in search of selfish indulgences, men are caught in its storms, and only after many tempests and much privation do they fly to the rock of refuge, which rests in the deep silence of their own being. While a man is absorbed in outward activities, he is giving out his energies and is becoming spiritually weaker, and in order to retain his moral vigor he must resort to solitary meditation. So needful is this that he who neglects it loses or does not attain the right knowledge of life, nor does he comprehend and overcome those most deeply rooted and subtlest of sins which appear like virtues deceiving the elect, and to which all but the truly wise succumb. True dignity abides with him alone, who, in the silent hour of inward thought, can still suspect and still revere himself in lowliness of heart. He who lives without ceasing in outward excitement lives most in disappointments and griefs. Where the sounds of pleasure are greatest, heart emptiness is the keenest and deepest. He also, whose whole life, even if not one of lust for pleasure, is centered in outward works, who deals only with the changing panorama of visible things, never falling back, in solitude, upon the inner and invisible world of permanent being, such a man does not attain knowledge and wisdom, but remains empty. He cannot aid the world, cannot feed its aspirations, for he has no food to offer it, his spiritual store being empty. But he who courts solitude in order to search for the truth of things, who subdues his senses and makes quiet his desires, such a man is daily attaining knowledge and wisdom. He becomes filled with the spirit of truth. He can aid the world, for his spiritual store is full and is kept well replenished. While a man is absorbed in the contemplation of inward realities, he is receiving knowledge and power. He opens himself like a flower to the universal light of truth and receives and drinks in its life-imparting rays. He also goes to the eternal foundation of knowledge and quenches his thirst in its inspiring waters. Such a man gains in 1 hour of concentrated thought more essential knowledge than a whole year's reading could impart. Being is infinite and knowledge is illimitable and its source inexhaustible, and he who draws upon the innermost depths of his being drinks from the spring of divine wisdom which can never run dry and quaffs the waters of immortality. It is this habitual association with the deep realities of being, this continual drinking in of the water of life at its perennial source, that constitutes genius. The resources of genius are inexhaustible because they are drawn from the original and universal source, and for the same reason the works of genius are ever new and fresh. The more a genius gives out, the fuller he becomes. With the accomplishment of every work his mind extends and expands, reaches out more vastly, and sees wider and ever wider ranges of power. The genius is inspired. He has bridged the gulf between the finite and infinite. He needs no secondary aids, but draws from that universal spring which is the source of every noble work. The difference between a genius and an ordinary man is this. The one lives in inward realities, the other in outward appearances. The one goes after pleasure, the other after wisdom. The one relies on books, the other relies upon his own being. Book learning is good when its true place is understood, but is not the source of wisdom. The source of wisdom is in life itself and is comprehended by effort, practice, and experience. Books give information, but they cannot bestow knowledge. They can stimulate but cannot accomplish. You must put forth effort and achieve for yourself. The man who relies entirely upon books and does not go to the silent resources within himself is superficial and becomes rapidly exhausted. He is uninspired, though he may be extremely clever, for he soon reaches the end of his stock of information and so becomes void and repetitious. His works lack the sweet spontaneity of life and ever-renewed freshness of inspiration. Such a man has cut himself off from the infinite supply and deals, not with life itself, but with dead or decaying appearances. Information is limited, knowledge is boundless. The inspiration of genius and greatness is fostered, evolved, and finally completed in solitude. The most ordinary man who conceives a noble purpose and, summoning all his energies and will, broods upon and ripens his purpose in solitude, will accomplish his object and become a genius. The man who renounces the pleasure of the world, who avoids popularity and fame, and who works in obscurity and thinks in solitude for the accomplishment of a lofty ideal for the human race, becomes a seer and a prophet. He who silently sweetens his heart, who attunes his mind to that which is pure and beautiful and good, who in long hours of lonely contemplation strives to reach to the central and eternal heart of things, brings himself in touch with the inaudible harmonies of being, opens himself for the reception of the cosmic song, and becomes at last a singer and a poet. And so with all genius, it is the child of solitude, a very simple-hearted child, wide-eyed and listening and beautiful, yet withal to the noise-enamoured world an incomprehensible mystery of which it is only now and then vouchsafed a glimpse from beyond the well-guarded portals of silence. In man's self arise august anticipations, symbols, types of a dim splendour ever on before in that eternal circle life pursues. St. Paul, the cruel persecutor and blind bigot, after spending 3 years alone in the desert, comes forth a loving apostle and an inspired seer. Gautama Siddhartha, the man of the world, after 6 years in the forest of lonely struggle with his passions and intense meditation upon the deep mysteries of his nature, becomes Buddha, the enlightened one, the embodiment of calm, serene wisdom, to whom a heart-thirsty world turns to refreshing waters of immortality. Lao Tse, an ordinary citizen filling a worldly office in his search for knowledge, courts solitude and discovers Tao, the supreme reason, by virtue of which he becomes a world teacher. Jesus, the unlettered carpenter, after many years of solitary communion upon the mountains with the unfailing love and wisdom, comes forth a blessed Saviour of mankind. Even after they had attained and had scaled the lofty heights of divine knowledge, these great souls were much alone and retired frequently for brief seasons of solitude. The greatest man will fall from his moral height and lose his influence if he neglects that renewal of power which can only be obtained in solitude. These masters attained their power by consciously harmonizing their thoughts and lives with the creative energies within themselves, and by transcending individuality and sinking their petty personal will in the universal will, they became masters of creative thought and stand as the loftiest instruments for the outworking of cosmic evolution. And this is not miraculous, it is a matter of law. It is not mysterious except insofar as law is mysterious. Every man becomes a creative master insofar as he subordinates himself to the universally good and true. Every poet, painter, saint and sage is the mouthpiece of the eternal. The perfection of the message varies with the measure of individual selflessness. Insofar as self intervenes, the distinctness of the work and message becomes blurred. Perfect selflessness is the acme of genius, the consummation of power. Such self-abnegation can only be begun, pursued, and completed in solitude. A man cannot gather together and concentrate his spiritual forces while he is engaged in spending those forces in worldly activities, and although after power is attained, the balance of forces can be maintained under all circumstances, even in the midst of the antagonistic throng, such power is only secured after many years of frequent and habitual solitude. Man's true home is in the great silence. This is the source of all that is real and abiding within him. His present nature, however, is dual, and outer activities are necessary. Neither entire solitude nor entire action is the true life in the world, but that is the true life which gathers, in solitude, strength and wisdom to rightly perform the activities of life. And as a man returns to his home in the evening, weary with labor for that sweet rest and refreshment which will prepare him for another day's toil, so must he would not break down in the labor of life, come away, form the noise and toil of the world's great workshop, and rest for brief periods in his abiding home in the silence. He who does this, spending some portion of each day in sacred and purposeful solitude, will become strong and useful and blessed. Solitude is for the strong, or for those who are ready to become strong. When a man is becoming great, he becomes solitary. He goes in solitude to seek, and that which he seeks he finds, for there is a way to all knowledge, all wisdom, all truth, all power. And the way is forever open, but it lies through soundless solitudes and the unexplored silences of man's being. Solitude is for the strong, or for those who are ready to become strong. When a man is becoming great, he becomes solitary. He goes in solitude to seek, and that which he seeks he finds, for there is a way to all knowledge, all wisdom, all truth, all power. And the way is forever open, but it lies through soundless solitudes and the unexplored silences of man's being. Standing alone. By all means use to be alone. Salute thyself, see what thy soul doth wear. George Herbert. He that has light within his own clear breast, may sit in the centre and enjoy bright day. Milton. In the life of blessedness, self-reliance is of the utmost importance. If there is no peace, there must be strength. If there is to be security, there must be stability. If there is to be lasting joy, there must be no leaning upon things which at any moment may be snatched away forever. A man does not commence to truly live until he finds an immovable center within himself on which to stand, by which to regulate his life, and from which to draw his peace. If he trusts to that which fluctuates, he also will fluctuate. If he leans upon that which may be withdrawn, he will fall and be bruised. If he looks for satisfaction in perishable accumulations, he will starve for happiness in the midst of plenty. Let a man learn to stand alone, looking to no one for support, expecting no favors, craving no personal advantages, not begging nor complaining, not craving nor regretting, but relying upon the truth within himself, deriving his satisfaction and comfort from the integrity of his own heart. If a man can find no peace within himself, where shall he find it? If he dreads to be alone with himself, what steadfastness shall he find in company? If he can find no joy in communion with his own thoughts, how shall he escape misery in his contact with others? The man who has yet found nothing within himself upon which to stand will nowhere find a place of constant rest. Men everywhere are deluded by the superstition that their happiness rests with other people and with outward things, and as a result they live in continual disappointments, regrets, and lamentations. The man who does not look for happiness to any others or to external things, but finds within himself its inexhaustible source, will be self-contained and serene under all circumstances, and will never become the helpless victim of misery and grief. The man who looks to others for support, who measures his happiness by the conduct of others and not by his own, who depends upon their cooperation for his peace of mind, such a man has no spiritual foothold. His mind is tossed hither and thither with the continual changes going on around him, and he lives in that ceaseless ebb and flow of the spirits, which is wretchedness and unrest. He is a spiritual cripple, and has yet to learn how to maintain his mental center of gravity, and so go without the aid of crutches. As a child learns to walk in order to go about from place to place of itself strong and unaided, so should a man learn to stand alone, to judge and think and act for himself, and to choose in the strength of his own mind the oathway which he shall walk. Without is change and decay and insecurity, within is all surety and blessedness. The soul is sufficient of itself. Where the need is, there is the abundant supply. Your eternal dwelling place is within. Go there and take possession of your mansion. There you are a king, elsewhere you are a vassal. Be contented that others shall manage or mismanage their own little kingdom, and see to it that you reign strongly over your own. Your entire well-being and the well-being of the whole world lies there. You have a conscience, follow it. You have a mind, clarify it. You have a judgment, use and improve it. You have a will, employ and strengthen it. You have knowledge, increase it. There is a light within your soul, watch it, tend it, encourage it, shield it from the winds of passion, and help it to burn with a steadier and ever steadier radiance. Leave the world and come back to yourself. Think as a man, act as a man, live as a man, be rich in yourself, be complete in yourself. Find the abiding center within you and obey it. The earth is maintaining its orbit by its obedience to its center, the sun. Obey the center of light that is within you. Let others call it darkness if they will. You're responsible for yourself, are accountable to yourself, therefore rely upon yourself. If you fear yourself, who will place confidence in you? If you are untrue to yourself, where shall you find the sweet satisfaction of truth? The great man stands alone in the simple dignity of independent manhood. He pursues his own path fearlessly and does not apologize or beg leave. Criticism and applause are no more to him than the dust upon his coat, of which he shakes himself free. He is not guided by the changing opinions of men, but guides himself by the light of his own mind. Other men barter away their manhood for messes of flattery or fashion. Until you can stand alone, looking for guidance neither to spirits nor mortals, gods nor men, but guiding yourself by the light of the truth within you, you are not unfettered and free, not altogether blessed. but do not mistake pride for self-reliance. To attempt to stand upon the crumbling foundation of pride is to be already fallen. No man depends upon others more than the proud man. He drinks in their approbation and resents their censure. He mistakes flattery for sound judgment, and is most easily hurt or pleased by the opinions of others. His happiness is entirely in the hands of others. But the self-reliant man stands not upon personal pride, but on an abiding law, principle, ideal, reality within himself. Upon this he poises himself, refusing to be swept from his strong foothold either by the waves of passion within or the storms of opinion without. But should he at any time lose his balance, he quickly regains himself and is fully restored. His happiness is entirely in his own hands. Find your center of balance and succeed in standing alone, and whatever your work in life may be, you will succeed. You will accomplish what you set your mind upon, for the truly self-reliant man is the invincible man. But though you do not rely upon others, learn of them. Never cease to increase in knowledge, and be ever ready to receive that which is good and useful. You cannot have too much humility. The most self-reliant men are the most humble. No aristocrat, no prince born to the purple can begin to compare with the self-respect of the saint. Why is he lowly, but that he knows that he can well afford it, resting on the largeness of God in him? Learn of all men, and especially of the masters of truth, but do not lose your hold upon the truth, that the ultimate guidance is in yourself. A master can say, "Here is the path," but he can neither compel you to walk it nor walk it for you. You must put forth your own efforts, must achieve by your own strength, must make his truth your truth by your own unaided exertions. You must implicitly trust yourself. This thing is God, to be man with thy might, to grow great in the strength of thy spirit, and live out thy life as the light. But the self-reliant man stands, not upon personal pride, but on an abiding law, principle, ideal, reality within himself. Upon this he poises himself, refusing to be swept from his strong foothold either by the waves of passion within or the storms of opinion without. But should he at any time lose his balance, he quickly regains himself and is fully restored. His happiness is entirely in his own hands. Find your center of balance and succeed in standing alone, and, whatever your work in life may be, you will succeed. You will accomplish what you set your mind upon, for the truly self-reliant man is the invincible man. But, though you do not rely upon others, learn of them. Never cease to increase in knowledge, and be ever ready to receive that which is good and useful. You cannot have too much humility. The most self-reliant men are the most humble. No aristocrat, no prince born to the purple can begin to compare with the self-respect of the saint. Why is he lowly, but that he knows that he can well afford it, resting on the largeness of God in him? Free yourself from the self-imposed tyranny of slavish dependence, and stand alone, not as an isolated unit, but as a sympathetic portion of the whole. Find the joy that results from well-earned freedom, the peace that flows from wise self-possession, the blessedness that inheres in native strength. Honor to him who, self-complete if lone, carves to the grave one pathway all his own, and heeding naught that men may think or say, asks but his soul if doubtful of the way. Understanding the simple laws of life. Watch narrowly the demonstration of a truth, its birth, and you trace back the effluence to its spring and source within us. Browning. More is the treasure of law than gems, sweeter than comb its sweetness, its delights, delightful past compare. The Light of Asia. Walking those byways which I have so far pointed out, resting in their beauty and drinking in their blessedness, the pilgrim along life's broad highway will in due time come to one wherein his last burden will fall from him, where all his weariness will pass away, where he will drink of light-hearted liberty and rest in perpetual peace. And this most blessed of spiritual byways, the richest source of strength and comfort, I call the right understanding of the simple laws of life. He who comes to it leaves behind him all lack and longing, all doubt and perplexity, all sorrow and uncertainty. He lives in the fullness of satisfaction, in light and knowledge, in gladness and surety. He who comprehends the utter simplicity of life, who obeys its laws and does not step aside into the dark paths and complex mazes of selfish desire, stands where no harm can reach him, where no enemy can lay him low, and he doubts, desires and sorrows no more. Doubt ends where reality begins. Painful desire ceases where the fullness of joy is perpetual and complete, and when the unfailing and eternal good is realized, what room is there for sorrow? Human life, when rightly lived, is simple with a beautiful simplicity, but it is not rightly lived while it is bound to a complexity of lusts, desires, and wants. These are not the real life, but the burning fever and painful disease which originate in an unenlightened condition of mind. The curtailing of one's desires is the beginning of wisdom, their entire mastery its consummation. This is so because life is bounded by law, and, being inseparable from law, life has no need that is not already supplied. Now lust or desire is not need, but a rebellious superfluity, and as such it leads to deprivation and misery. The prodigal son, while in his father's house, not only had all that he required, but was surrounded by a superabundance. Desire was not necessary because all things were at hand. But when desire entered his heart, he went into a far country and began to be in want. And it was only when he became reduced to the utmost extremity of starvation that he turned with longing towards his father's home. This parable is symbolical of the evolution of the individual and the race. Man has come into such a complexity of cravings that he lives in continual discontent, dissatisfaction, want, and pain. And his only cure lies in a return to the Father's home, that is, to actual living or being as distinguished from desiring. But a man does not do this until he is reduced to the last extremity of spiritual starvation. He has then reaped the experience of pain and sorrow as the result of desire, and looks back with longing towards the true life of peace and plenty. And so he turns round and begins his toilsome journey back towards his home, towards that rich life of simple being wherein is emancipation from the thraldom and fever and hunger of desire. And this longing for the true life, for truth, reality, should not be confounded with desire. It is aspiration. Desire is the craving for possession. Aspiration is the hunger of the heart for peace. The craving for things leads ever farther and farther from peace, and not only ends in deprivation, but is in itself a state of perpetual want. Until it comes to an end, rest, satisfaction, is an impossibility. The hunger for things can never be satisfied, but the hunger for peace can, and the satisfaction of peace is found, is fully possessed, when all selfish desire is abandoned. Then there is fullness of joy, abounding plenty, and rich and complete blessedness. In this supremely blessed state, life is comprehended in its perfect symmetry and simplicity, and the acme of power and usefulness is attained. Then even the hunger for peace ceases, for peace becomes the normal condition, is fully possessed, constant and never varying. Men immersed in desire ignorantly imagine that the conquest of desire leads to inactivity, loss of power, and lifelessness. Instead, it leads to highly concentrated activity, to the full employment of power, and to a life so rich, so glorious, and so abundantly blessed as to be incomprehensible to those who hunger for pleasures and possessions. Of this life only can it be said, "Here are no sounds of discord, no profane or senseless gossip of unworthy things, only the songs of chisels and of pens, of busy brushes and ecstatic strains, of souls surcharged with music most divine. Here is no idle sorrow, no poor grief, for any day or object left behind, for time is counted precious, and herein is such complete abandonment of self, that tears turn into rainbows and enhance the beauty of the land where all is fair." When a man is rescued from selfish desire, his mind is unencumbered, and he is free to work for humanity. no longer racing after those gratifications which leave him hungry still. All his powers are at his immediate command. Seeking no rewards, he can concentrate all his energies upon the faultless completion of his duties, and so accomplish all things and fulfill all righteousness. The fully enlightened and fully blessed man is not prompted to action by desire, but works from knowledge. The man of desire needs the promise of reward to urge him to action. He is as a child working for the possession of a toy, but the man of knowledge, living in the fullness of life and power, can at any moment bring his energies into requisition for the accomplishment of that which is necessary. He is spiritually a full-grown man. For him all rewards have ceased. To him all occurrences are good. He lives always in complete satisfaction. Such a man has attained to life, and his delight, and it is a sweet, perpetual and never-failing delight, is in obedience to the simple demands of exact and never-failing law. But this life of supreme blessedness is an end, and the pilgrim who is striving towards it, the prodigal returning to it, must travel thither and employ means to get there. He must pass through the country of his animal desires, disentangling himself from their intricacies, simplifying them, overcoming them. This is the way, and he has no enemies but what spring within himself. At first the way seems hard, because, blinded by desire, he does not perceive the simple structure of life, and its laws are hidden from him. But as he becomes more simple in his mind, the direct laws of life become unfolded to his spiritual perception, and at once the point is reached where these laws begin to be understood and obeyed. Then the way becomes plain and easy. There is no more uncertainty and darkness, but all is seen in the clear light of knowledge. It will help to accelerate the progress of the searcher for the true and blessed life if we now turn to a consideration of some of these simple laws which are rigidly mathematical in their operations. The elementary laws never apologize. All life is one, though it has a diversity of manifestations. All law is one, but it is applicable and operative in a variety of ways. There is not one law for matter and another for mind, not one for the material and visible and another for the spiritual and invisible. There is the same law throughout. There is not one kind of logic for the world and another for the spirit, but the same logic is applicable to both. Men, faithfully and with unerring worldly wisdom, observe certain laws or rules of action in material things, knowing that to ignore or disobey them would be great folly on their part, ending in disaster for themselves and confusion for society and the state. But they err in supposing and believing that the same rules do not apply in spiritual things, and thereby suffer for their ignorance and disobedience. It is a law in worldly things that a man shall support himself, that he shall earn his living, and that he that will not work, neither shall he eat. Men observe this law, recognizing its justice and goodness, and so earn the necessary material sustenance. But in spiritual things, men, broadly speaking, deny and ignore the operation of this law. They think that, while it is absolutely just that a man should earn his material bread, and that the man who shirks this law should wander in rags and want, it is right that they should beg for their spiritual bread, think it to be just that they should receive all spiritual blessings without either deserving or attempting to earn them. The result is that most men wander in spiritual beggary and want, that is, in suffering and sorrow, deprived of spiritual sustenance, of joy and knowledge and peace. If you are in need of any worldly thing, food, clothing, furniture, or other necessary, you do not beg of the storekeeper to give it to you. You ask the price of it, pay for it with your money, and then it becomes your own. You recognize the perfect justice in giving an equivalent for what you receive, and would not wish it to be otherwise. The same just law prevails in spiritual things. If you are in need of any spiritual thing, joy, assurance, peace, or what else soever, you can only come into full possession of it by giving an equivalent. You must pay the price for it. As you must give a portion of your material substance for a worldly thing, so you must give a portion of your immaterial substance for a spiritual thing. You must yield up some passion or lust or vanity or indulgence before the spiritual possession can be yours. The miser who clings to his money and will not give up any of it because of the pleasure which its possession affords him cannot have any of the material comforts of life. He lives in continual want and discomfort in spite of all his wealth. The man who will not give up his passions, who clings to anger, unkindness, sensuality, pride, vanity, self-indulgence for the momentary pleasure which their gratification affords him, is a spiritual miser. He cannot have any spiritual comforts, and suffers continual spiritual want and uneasiness in spite of the wealth of worldly pleasures which he fondly hugs and refuses to give up. The man who is wise in worldly things neither begs nor steals, but labors and purchases, and the world honors him for his uprightness. The man who is wise in spiritual things neither begs nor steals, but labors in his own inner world, and purchases his spiritual possessions. Him the whole universe honors for his righteousness. It is another law in worldly things that a man who engages himself to another in any form of employment shall be content with the wages upon which he agreed. If, at the end of his week's work, and on receiving his wages, he were to ask his employer for a larger sum, pleading that, though he could not justly claim it, and did not really deserve it, yet he expected it, he would not only not receive the larger sum, but would doubtless be discharged from his post. Yet in spiritual things men do not think it to be either foolish or selfish to ask for those blessings, spiritual wages, upon which they never agreed, for which they never labored, and which they do not deserve. Every man gets from the law of the universe that upon which he agrees and for which he works, no more, no less, and he is continually entering into agreements with the supreme law, the master of the universe. For every thought and act which he gives, he receives its just equivalent. For all work done in the form of deeds, he receives the wages due to him. Knowing this, the enlightened man is always content, always satisfied and in perfect peace, knowing that whatever he receives, be it that men call misfortune or good fortune, he has earned. The great law never cheats any man of his just due, but it says to the railer and the complainer, "Friend, didst thou not agree with me for a penny a day?" Again, if a man would grow rich in worldly goods, he must economize and husband his financial resources until he has accumulated sufficient capital to invest in some branch of industry. Then he must judiciously invest his little store of capital, neither holding it too tightly nor letting it go carelessly. He thus increases both in worldly wisdom and worldly riches. The idle spendthrift cannot grow rich. He is wasteful and riotous. He who would grow rich in spiritual things must also economize and husband his mental resources. He must curb his tongue and his impulses, not wasting his energy in idle gossip, vain argument, or excesses of temper. In this way he will accumulate a little store of wisdom which is his spiritual capital, and this he must send out into the world for the good of others, and the more he uses it, the richer will he become. Thus does a man increase in both heavenly wisdom and heavenly riches. The man who follows his blind impulses and desires, and does not control and govern his mind, is a spiritual spendthrift. He can never become rich in divine things. It is a physical law that if we would reach the summit of a mountain, we must climb thither. The path must be sought and then carefully followed, and the climber must not give up and go back because of the labor involved and the difficulties to be overcome, nor on account of aching climbs, otherwise his object cannot be accomplished. And this law is also spiritual. He who would reach the high altitudes of moral or intellectual grandeur must climb thither by his own efforts. He must seek out the pathway and then assiduously follow it, not giving up and turning back, but surmounting all difficulties and enduring for a time trials, temptations, and heartaches, and at last he will stand upon the glorious summit of moral perfection, the world of passion, temptation, and sorrow beneath his feet, and the boundless heavens of dignity stretching vast and silent above his head. If a man would reach a distant city or any place of destination, he must travel thither. There is no law by which he can be instantly transported there. He can only get there by putting forth the necessary exertion. If he walks, he will put forth great exertion, but it will cost him nothing in money. If he drives or takes train, there will be less actual labor, but he must pay in money for which he has labored. To reach any place requires labor. This cannot be avoided. It is law. Equally so spiritually. He who would reach any spiritual destination such as purity, compassion, wisdom or peace must travel thither and must labor to get there. There is no law by which he can suddenly be transported to any of these beautiful spiritual cities. He must find the most direct route and then put forth the necessary labor, and at last he will come to the end of his journey. These are but a few of the many laws or manifestations of the one great law which are to be understood, applied and obeyed before the full manhood and maturity of spiritual life and blessedness can be attained. There is no worldly or physical law which is not operative with equal exactness in the spiritual realm, that is, the inner and invisible world of man's beings. Just as physical things are the shadows and types of spiritual realities, so worldly wisdom is the reflected image of divine wisdom. All those simple operations of human life in worldly things which men never question but follow and obey implicitly because of their obvious plainness and exactness, obtain in spiritual things with the same unerring accuracy. And when this is understood, and these laws are as implicitly obeyed in spiritual as in worldly matters, then has a man reached the firm standing ground of exact knowledge. His sorrows are at an end, and he can doubt no more. Life is uninvolved, uncompromising justice. Its operations are simple, invincible logic. Law reigns forever, and the heart of law is love. Favoritism and caprice are the reverse of both law and love. The universe has no favorites. It is supremely just and gives to every man his rightful earnings. All is good because all is according to law, and because all is according to law, man can find the right way in life and, having found it, can rejoice and be glad. The Father of Jesus is the unfailing good which is embodied in the law of things. No evil can happen to a good man either in life or death. Jesus recognized the good in his own fate and exonerated all his persecutors from blame. No man, he declared, taketh my life from me, but I lay it down of myself. That is, he himself had brought about his own end. He who has, by simplifying his life and purifying his mind, arrived at an understanding of the beautiful simplicity of being, perceives the unvarying operation of law in all things, and knows the result of all his thoughts and deeds upon himself and the world, knows what effects are bound up with the mental causes which he sets in motion. He then thinks and does only those thoughts and deeds that are blessed in their inception, blessed in their growth, and blessed in their completion, humbly accepting the lawful results of all the deeds done when in a state of ignorance. He neither complains nor fears nor questions, but is at rest in obedience, is perfectly blessed in his knowledge of the good law. The tissue of our life to be, we weave with colours all our own, and in the field of destiny we reap as we have sown. And if we reap as we have sown, and take the dole we deal, the law of pain is love alone, the wounding is to heal. Happy endings. Such is the law which moves to righteousness, which none at last can turn aside or stay. The heart of it is love, the end of it is peace and consummation sweet. Obey. The light of Asia. So haply when thy task shall end, the wrong shall lose itself in right, and all thy week-day Sabbaths blend with the long Sabbath of the light. Whittier. Life has many happy endings because it has much that is noble and pure and beautiful. Although there is much sin and ignorance in the world, many tears and much pain and sorrow, there is also much purity and knowledge, many smiles and much healing and gladness. No pure thought, No unselfish deed can fall short of its felicitous result, and every such result is a happy consummation. A pleasant home is a happy ending. A successful life is a happy ending. A task well and faithfully done is a happy ending. To be surrounded by kind friends is a happy ending. A quarrel put away, grudges wiped out, unkind words confessed and forgiven, friend restored to friend, all these are happy endings. To find that which one has long and tediously sought, to be restored from tears to gladness, to awaken in the bright sunlight out of the painful nightmare of sin, to strike, after much searching, the heavenly way in life. These are indeed blessed consummations. He who looks for, finds, and enters the byways which I have indicated will come to this one without seeking it, for his whole life will be filled with happy endings. He who begins right and continues right does not need to desire and search for felicitous results. They are already at hand. They follow as consequences. They are the certainties, the realities of life. There are happy endings which belong solely to the material world. These are transient and they pass away. These are happy endings which belong to the spiritual world. These are eternal and they do not pass away. Sweeter companionships, pleasures and material comforts, but they change and fade away. Sweeter still are purity, wisdom, and the knowledge of truth, and these never change nor fade away. Wherever a man goes in this world, he can take his worldly possessions with him, but soon he must part company with them, and if he stands upon these alone, deriving all his happiness from them, he will come to a spiritual ending of great emptiness and want. But he has attained to the possession of spiritual things, can never be deprived of his source of happiness. He will never have to part company with it, and wherever he goes in the whole universe, he will carry his possession with him. His spiritual end will be the fullness of joy. Happy in the eternal happiness is he who has come to that life from which the thought of self is abolished. Already, even now, and in this life, he has entered the kingdom of heaven, Nirvana, paradise, the New Jerusalem, the Olympus of Jupiter, the Valhalla of the gods. He knows the final unity of life, the great reality of which these fleeting and changing names are but feeble utterances. He is at rest on the bosom of the infinite. Sweet is the rest and deep the bliss of him who has freed his heart from its lusts and hatreds and dark desires, and he who, without any shadow of bitterness or selfishness resting upon him, and looking out upon the world with boundless compassion and love, can breathe in his inmost heart the blessing, peace unto all living things, making no exceptions or distinctions. Such a man has reached that happy ending which can never be taken away. For this is the perfection of life, the fullness of peace, the consummation of perfect blessedness.